On today's episode of Boundary Breakers, we sit down with Brant Pinvidic. Brant is an award-winning Hollywood TV producer. He created the shows Extreme Weight Loss and Bar Rescue, among others. One day, just before pitching his latest and greatest reality TV show idea, Brant had an epiphany. It all of a sudden occurred to him the secret to a successful sales pitch. He went on to write The 3-Minute Rule, New York Times bestselling book, and since then has been traveling the world, coaching business executives and teams about how to create a successful sales pitch. He does so with a technique that he calls the whack method. Stick around, you're going to love this one. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, sort of where you came from, where you're born, just so the audience can relate a little bit and understand who they're hearing from. And then we can dig into your incredible experience telling stories.
I mean, that sounds like a perfect plan. Listen, awesome. I grew up in Canada. I was born and raised in Canada. Canada is not a very entrepreneurial friendly place. Like, that's just the way it is. It's the opposite. And so I think I grew up my entire life with big ideas and thoughts and just never was accepted for that. It was always like, I'm just out there and full of and just, like not in reality. And so that was my entrepreneurial experience. And I had tried so many different businesses and, I just figured out a way to make them all screw up somehow. It felt like, but nothing just, it just never clicked. And then I had tried to do a TV show, haphazardly in Canada because I owned a bar and I was trying to keep people in the bar, and I came up with these games, and then I did a radio show about it with a friend, and then would this be good on TV? So I tried to make it into a TV show. Well, I didn't know anything about TV, so it didn't work, of course. And Canada's like, we're not buying TV from you. We're buying shows from the United States for cheap. Why would we buy your piece of crap? Anyways.
Gotcha.
To shorten that story, I ended up in the United States with the show, and it was a completely different situation. It was what ingenuity, amazing, thoughtfulness to come and try out with this. How did you do all this work? Like, even the places that didn't want to buy the show were like, man, if you put this together, we want to work with you. And so I came down with I didn't have money to pay for my hotel for the 7 days. You had to buy flights. 7 days was the cheapest flight, but I didn't have money to pay for the whole hotel. And then I came here and I was getting offer after offer, and I sold the show to NBC. I got an overall deal for $100,000 a year 20 years ago to just develop ideas. And no one knew that I just had never been on a TV set before, never made a show before. And I just was like, working my way through, that imposter syndrome, just pretending. But it was the early days of reality TV, and people they weren't asking about your background as much. Like, it just wasn't a thing. They just knew I pitched an amazingly well thought out, perfectly executed idea for a show, and I just kept coming in and doing that. And I had one of the top agents, because the agents were like, "Yeah, we want to rep this. This looks good." And almost 4 years to the date, I got a job as the head of programming for the TLC network. This is a major job. I'd never even had a corporate job before in my entire life.
Wow.
And so I remember thinking to myself, like, a couple of years earlier, I had sold a pilot, and I was in the screening room of where we do these focus groups, right? And they pay people $25 in a sandwich to tell you why your stuff is terrible. And the guy that was running the focus group came into me, and it was the president of the network, and we were sitting there, and he goes, "Hey, do you guys want to do the slide or the dial for the audience reaction or interaction?" And Paul, who was the president of the network, turned to me and said, "I don't know, Brant, you've done this more than I have. What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Oh, I like the slide." And 4 years later, I'm running a network, right? And so,
wow,
you learn that process. And then over the course of that time, I realized that the years that I had spent raising money and trying to, being in people's room to try to raise money for my ideas, or I wouldn't eat that week, taught me very valuable lessons about how to sell without looking desperate, how to sell without diminishing your value. And when I combined that with what I had learned in Hollywood about storytelling and what later became the 3-minute rule of how to resolve story, those two things combined together did really well. I was relatively widely regarded as one of the top selling producers in Hollywood, arguably, I guess. And so, I had a really good run. And, my pitches, the irony was I wasn't doing a lot like special or spectacular. I was simple and I was straight to the point and I was very detailed. And it came from a moment I was in the lobby of CBS and I was getting ready for a big pitch with the head of CBS. And out of the pitch room where you go pitch walks Mark Burnett. And I was like, oh, hey, Mark, we're talking to Mark. And he's kind of sort of looking over my shoulder and in walks Simon Cowell.
Wow.
And he's pitching. So I'm going in after Mark Burnett and then Simon Cowell's going in after me. And I just remember, Simon comes over and we're talking and this is early in my career. And I can't even, I get him to try to make small talk with the guys and, we're hanging out or whatever. And I'm just like, I'm so in my head now, like I got to go follow and I got to wedge between these two guys. And we get into the pitch room and I just realized that, Les Moonves does not want to hear about my day. He doesn't want me to go into some big setup of what this is. And I just was like, I got to get out of here. And I just went, here's the idea. Here's the way it's going to work. Here's why we think it's good for CBS. Here's what we think it's going to cost. And I was in and out of that room in like 9 minutes. And my agent was like, that was the greatest pitch I've ever heard. I was like,
wow.
What? Because you got to do that again. So I started doing it at the next networks. We sold the show. And then he's like, you got to do, like, that's what you got to. And I realized like that was starting to be the pattern where I'd come into the room and I'd make my small talk. And then it's like, okay, we're going to talk the show. Here's the idea for the show. Here's why I think it's here's how we're going to produce it. Just bam. And I started to get this reputation of having the best pitches in Hollywood. And network buyers would say like, oh, as soon as I see you on my calendar, I'm excited because I know it's going to be something good. I'm like, I'm not making the ideas better. I'm just making the experience of understanding the ideas cleaner. And it just took off from there. So, and that's became the 3-minute rule. And then once I sold the book, I was like, yeah, I don't want to do Hollywood anymore.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So, I mean, this is so fascinating to me. But it seems to me that, well, let's back up a little bit, right? You started, at least early in your career, you were the senior vice president of development for TLC. And you played a pivotal role in launching the reality show John and Kate Plus 8, right?
Yes. That's a good way of saying it. Yes. It's a nice slant way of saying it.
In addition to that, you also were influential or had a role in Extreme Weight Loss, the Extreme Weight Loss franchise, Funniest Wins, Catch a Contractor.
Yeah, those I created. I created those shows. Yeah.
You created those, okay, and then Bar Rescue for Spike TV. Yeah. So, if you'll bear with me, I want to sort of break this down because it's fascinating to me. It seems like there are really two things that you have world-class talent in. The first, it seems to me, is you're able to identify and understand. You can sort of have your finger on the pulse of what people will find interesting. I mean, I don't know how you could come up with an idea for a show or come up with all of these ideas, all these successful ideas, if you were consistently wrong about what people would like to watch, right?
I mean, here's the deal. The truth is yes and no, right? Like, if you're a great singer, right? Like, you won't be Taylor Swift unless you're a great singer and a great songwriter, right? So, yeah, I had tremendous success in Hollywood, so I had some real good creative instincts as well, but I was able to pitch those ideas effectively. Now, the truth is,
gotcha.
Like, John and Kate Plus 8, the reason I have a pivotal role in that is I didn't screw it up. I didn't watch the show when I bought it. I put it on the air before I ever saw it. It was already a special on one of our sister networks. And I was desperate for a slot. And people were like, hey, you got to watch this DVD. And I didn't. And I just said, which one did best as a special? Oh, this one about the 8 kids. Put that on the air. Right. And I didn't watch the show till it was already starting to be a hit. And when I watched it, I was like, oh, I'm going to get fired. This is the worst produced show I've ever seen in my life. If anybody else watches this, I'm going to get fired. So I tried to make changes, and it was like I got fired anyways, in spite of that. So whereas Bar Rescue was, listen, arguably one of the biggest shows, but Gordon Ramsay already had Kitchen Nightmares on the air. That's not in reinventing the wheel. You know what I mean? Like, I have another 24. I have 50 shows that I didn't sell that I thought were the most creative and clever things you've ever heard of.
Interesting.
And that's being kind at 50. It's probably more like 100. And so, and I also have shows that I had no idea were going to sell and they sold. Like, and I've had stuff where I was in the edit bay editing every single frame and the show tanked. And I have shows that I pretended to be in the edit bay because I just couldn't be bothered because it's such a piece of crap show, and that show rated. So the creative instinct of what quote unquote people, the masses, are going to like, man, like, that's so hard to do. Like, if you look at the record of Hollywood and what we put out for TV shows that fail, like, it's 99 out of 100 fail. So it's like, how smart can we be? The difference is that when we decide to do something, the execution and the storytelling and the structure of that is flawless. And that's what you find now with Netflix. There's a lot of like European series on Netflix that are actually doing relatively well. It's because they're written really well and they're good stories with good ideas, but they're poorly executed. So most people will never find it, right? And what we do in Hollywood really well is we execute at such a wildly high level that you can get away with sometimes the creative being, you know, Marvel Universe crap. And it's like, it still works, you know?
Gotcha.
So my creative instincts have been honed over the years. Some are good, some are bad. But my ability to convey information and make other people understand my idea the way I understand it is, you know, arguably one of the best in the world. So that's really what I trade in mostly.
Gotcha. And look, I want to spend the vast majority of this time talking about your book, The 3-Minute Rule, and the WAC method. And, you know, I want to dig deep into that. But before we get there, so tell me about the documentary "Why I'm Not on Facebook" and how that came about.
I was watching a documentary. It was after Morgan Spurlock did Super Size Me, and there was a guy who did a documentary that was a rebuttal to Super Size Me called, I think it was called Fathead. And it was a guy who did a documentary where he ate McDonald's for a whole year or whatever, this whole month, and it was the anti Super Size Me. And I thought the premise was really fun, and I watched it, and I remember sitting at the end of the movie going like, that was, not that it was bad, it was just so simple. And I was just like, I remember saying like, oh my God, I could have made that yesterday. Like, I could make that in my sleep. And I'm looking at his name, like, directed by, produced by, and written. And I'm thinking to myself, wait, instead of just going like, I could have made that, I'm like, wait, I could have made that. Like, what am I doing? So I set out to make a documentary, and I was like, I'm going to make a film. Because I've been producing film, and I'm going to direct a film. I'm going to make it myself. And I just set out to try to find a cool topic to do. And my son came to me and wanted to join Facebook. And I was like, no, absolutely. Facebook is evil. It's terrible. And he's like, why? And I was like, couldn't really come up with a good, and then everybody was like, oh my God, that's, because that was the thing. Like, you're not on Facebook? I'm like, no, I'm not on Facebook. And so I went to go tell the story of like, should I let my son join or not? And, you know, I made the first version of it, and it was an absolute piece of crap. My editor said like, I'm sorry, dude, but like, this is a piece of garbage. Like, everything you filmed is completely worthless. You're telling people all about this and that, and like, nobody wants to know these details. The only scene out of the 48 of them that you filmed that was remotely valuable is this one with your kid, where you're talking about it. That's it. You got to go make the whole movie like that. And I was like, but then it's going to be about me, and I don't want to do that. And so just couldn't stop. So then the film did really well. It was pretty fun. And it was like my foray into directing. And so I like that process.
Well, that's a really interesting peek behind the curtain. And then you followed it up with "Why I'm Not on Pokemon Go." Was that the next question you got from your kid? Did he want to use that?
Well,
or play that?
You know, the movie did really well. And so people were just like, I got this vibe from people that were just like, oh my God, I feel the same way about whatever, right? Something that's popular that you just don't get. Why is everybody doing it? And I sort of came to the conclusion that like, just because I don't understand it doesn't mean it's not good, right? Like, so many people are into playing video games or doing this niche thing around their world or their community. And just because I don't understand it or doesn't appeal to me doesn't mean that there's not value in it. And so I had done a bunch of podcast episodes around those, taking different topics and trying to understand it from a different perspective. And those had done really, really well. And so it was actually Rob Lowe had come to me and said like, hey, I want to turn this into a TV show. You should be doing this more often. And I was like, oh man, I produce TV shows for a living. I do not want to be part of that. And so the same thing, my daughter, I caught her sneaking out, 13 years old, sneaking out of the house, not to go be with her boyfriend, but to go catch Pokemon down the street. And I was like, oh, I got to do this. And so I made that into a short, and that did better than any of it. I think that's probably, the response I got from that was outrageous. It was crazy, but so I'll do a little creative on that. So
yeah, well, that's cool. And look, and the reason I wanted to talk about, your involvement with these other shows is, you obviously, it's not like you sort of came out of the blue and wrote the 3-minute rule, right? It's based on a career of trying to pitch ideas and the lessons that you, as you just told a minute ago, that you started to recognize and realize that, look, people don't want to hear this. They want to hear that. I need to focus on that.
Yeah. It's not what you want to say. It's what needs to be said. That's what you should be focusing on. And that came from two big pieces. Well, I used to call the 3-minute rule when we were in the edit bay of like, we got to resolve this scene in 3 minutes. Because what happens is I shoot it, I film it, my editor falls in love with it. We all know every detail of every character. We know the next scene's coming up. Like, so you'd end up having this long, robust scene, and you're like, how long is that? And he's like, 7.5 minutes. It's like, whoa. It's like, we got a 22-minute show. Like, what are we doing here? And so you'd be trying to resolve these scenes. So these epic big scenes that change the course of this episode. And it's like, guys, 3-minute rule. Here we go. How do we get it to 3 minutes? And you'd have to come back the next day, or you'd have to have a different editor look at it, because people get so precious about their information and their wording. And so you'd string 5 or 6 edits together and you'd be like, I can't edit that. This is perfect. And then you'd have like 9 of these things together. You're like, well, we can't keep all 9 of them. And so that was the big piece that I had learned. And then, ironically, I just happened to be at a hotel in LA, and an investment banker overheard me pitching ideas to my family one night. We had a bunch of drinks and I was telling them about my 50 ideas that the networks didn't buy. And they're like, oh my God, those are the best ideas I've ever heard. And I was like, I know. And he said to me, hey, can you teach my clients how to do what you do? And I was like, no, I can't teach people how to sell TV shows. It's a real skill. And he's like, no, I want you to teach my clients how to pitch their ideas without putting people to sleep. And I thought that was fascinating. And so he's a big investment banker. He does these big conferences, micro and small cap public companies, and blah, blah, blah. And so we happened to be on the East Coast at the same time doing the conference. And I was like, yeah, I'll come by. So I went and saw his conference, and I sat in on one of the guys he wanted me to meet. It's oil and gas company, $2 billion company, CEO. He pitched his idea to the room of investors. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard in my life. I could not believe that anybody would put that together for 23 minutes. Like, anybody who could do that to 23 minutes of time should never be in charge of anything. And it was so shocking and jarring. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, how was it? I was like, well, nobody asked any questions. And like, I had to fight to stay awake. Like, let me watch it again. I'll torture myself. But after the second time I saw him do it, I said, like, did you tell me, like, I heard you say you could still drill for oil at $32 a barrel when everybody else is laying their rigs down at 38? Like, and he's like, yeah, like I said, about the lease land. I was like, it took you 17 and a half minutes to say that. And so I reordered some of his slides. I was like, start with this slide. He's like, what? But I haven't even said who I am. I haven't even told him about my 8 years at dynamic thermodynamics. It says Chevron. And I was like, let's just put that slide. And so anyways, he did that. And sure enough, he got questions and people were engaged. And so he's like, hey man, you got to come and work with me and redo this. And I was like, I got a job. Like, no. And I remember asking the investment banker guy, and I said, like, what? He wants to come out. Like, I can have him come out on the weekend and spend a day with him. But like, what should I charge for that? And he's like, charge something outrageous, like ridiculous, like $25,000 for the day. I was like, all right. He's like, how much? And I was like, you got to fly out to LA. I'm not coming out to Texas, and get the hotel room, and it's $25,000. He goes, okay. I flew out.
Wow.
And I spent the day with him, and I just broke down what his business was, just like I was breaking out a TV show, which I did 3 or 4 of those every day. And he called me like 2 weeks later after we went through this exercise, and you could hear the emotion in his voice, and he was saying, like, you changed my life. I'll never forget what you've done for me. Like, you've allowed me to go out and meet and talk about this company the way it always should have been. And now I love this, and we completed our raise and blah, 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 right? And I was just like, holy crap. No network president had ever said anything like that to me. It was always the opposite. They're like, the first note we got on Bar Rescue, the pilot, was, this is the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. Do you even know how to make television? We're 250 episodes into that show. So I was like, oh man, I got to do that. So I started working with other companies with this investment banker, same thing. And I realized that what we were doing with the 3-minute rule to simplify those scenes was the same as simplify your slides, simplifies your business. And the merit of that became the basics. And I write for Forbes, and I wrote an article for Forbes about how the 3-minute rule could help any business. And it just exploded from there. And then I was like, I'm going to write this in a book. And there we went.
Rest is history.
Rest is history.
No, I love it. And that's what's so fascinating to me about it, or so interesting, is, I mean, you obviously you cut your teeth and harnessed the knowledge and expertise in Hollywood, but it also, as you mentioned, is equally applicable to business. But at least in my opinion, I mean, it's equally applicable to anybody that has something that they want to explain or a story to tell another human or a group of humans.
Yeah.
I don't see how it could possibly be limited to just a business or Hollywood, whether it's even students, right? Like if they are presenting, a paper, an idea, a suggestion, a thesis, anything, this, simplifying what you have to say, I think is fascinating. So talk to me about the WAC method and how it works.
I'd say that's the most, sort of a profound element of the book in general from a practical standpoint, is the WAC method. And I say this on stage if I'm speaking, I'm like, if you take nothing else, but you just write these 4 things down and filter whatever you're going to say to the next person that you want to influence them in any way, if you just put it through this filter, it'll change your life. And I've watched it do some amazing thing. I just finished doing this massive keynote for Ericsson, a telecom company, and their entire structure and all of their divisions. And they have this huge event every year where every major, cellular service provider in the world shows up. It's and so we had all 4 of their areas and divisions. I must have got 80 different pitches from them, from all the different proof points and all the different products and everything, And when I signed up for them, I was like, I did my keynote and I do a bunch of stuff. And I said I would work on some of I didn't know it was that many. And so I got my inboxes flooded, and I was like, this is innocent. I'm not cheap, but like, they were not paying me enough to go through 81 different pitches, right?
Yeah.
So, but I kind of put myself in it, but we were really focused on the WAC method, and I did workshops with each of their divisions, walking them through, taking a pitch, going through that. And so I would say out of the 81 that sent me, 75 of them were already structured in the WAC method, and it was like a joy. Everyone I opened, I was like, this is amazing, right? So the WAC method is an acronym. It stands for W is what is it? H is how does it work? A is are you sure? And the C is can you do it? And when you look at the structure, it's like, what is it and how does it work? Those are the first 2 things. And when you think about the way humans process information, every decision we've ever made has to go through the structure of our decision-making process, which is first we conceptualize it. That's the first thing we got to do. Then we contextualize it, meaning like, how does it work for me? And how is it going to involve me? And then we actualize. Conceptualize, contextualize, actualize, right? That's how we make every decision. What shirt you wore today, what house you're going to live in, what countries you go to war with, should I kill my husband while he sleeps? All those things are all done the same structure, right? I have to understand what it is. I understand how it impacts me. Now I got to understand what I'm going to do next about it. And that decision tree is the same as you build your pitch. If you funnel your information through that same decision tree, what is it and how does it work? If you've ever heard anybody drone on about some idea, your brain goes, wait, could you just tell me what this is? Like, I just need to know, like, that's your first instinct. How does that work? So if you do that, what is it? He is a personal trainer that trains A-list celebrities to prepare for major action roles. Okay? That's what it is. That's 14 words. Now, everybody listening, you kind of already know what's going on. He's not talking about that he's a CrossFit certified expertise. He doesn't have a gym in Sherman. He doesn't tell you anything. He just said, what is it? Now, you cannot help but want to know what's next, which is, I move into the celebrity's house for 90 days prior to the role. I'm with them 24 hours a day, so they never cheat on a meal, never miss a workout. That's how they're guaranteed to be in the best shape when the movie starts rolling. Okay, that's how it works. Here's what I do. I train A-list celebrities for major action films. I do it with these steps. You still don't know if he does CrossFit or free weights or any. We don't know if he's certified. You don't know anything. Doesn't matter. Those are the first two things I want to know. Now, your brain cannot help but be like, really? This is my are you sure moment, right? Are you sure is there a marketplace? Have you done it before? Do you have the facts and the figures and the logic and the reason to back this up, right? Like, I understand the concept now, but does this make sense, right? Are you sure about that? And so when he says, yeah, I trained Hugh Jackman for Wolverine, I trained The Rock, I trained Mark Wahlberg, and Ryan Reynolds. You're like, oh, I get it, right? Now you're like, oh, you're that guy. I want you to picture it the other way around. If I would be like, hey, I'm a personal trainer, I train Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. Your brain goes, really? How many trainers do those guys have? Like, train them what, once? Train them 5 times? Like, what do you mean you trained them? Right? And that's what we want to do. Like, we want to build this big thing. And it's like, no, I just got to tell you what I do. And this is how I do it. Right? I've done it before. Now it's like, cost $250,000. I only work with studios directly. I got a 9-month waiting list. Okay? That's literally, you could pitch that entire thing. And there's a million personal trainers out there. Okay? Ryan Reynolds has probably had 40 of them. And so does everybody else. So pitching yourself as a personal trainer is really hard to do. But if you put it in that structure, every single person listening now is like, that's the guy I want. It's like, you still don't know if he does CrossFit or does he do free weights or what sort of diets he does. Like, you still don't know, but you know what? Doesn't matter, because that's not the whack method is for the information stage. Let me get you the core information so you understand what we're talking about. And then we can get to questions. Who wants to talk? You want to know if I'm a cross-trained guy? Am I certified? Whatever, right? That's the key structure. WHAC. That's it. If you just filter your stuff in 1 or 2 sentences in each of those, everything about your pitch changes.
I love it. I love it. What is it? How does it work? Are you sure? And can you do it?
Yep.
I love that. Look, so early on, right when we first started talking, you made a comment that I thought was profound. And you were talking about your imposter syndrome and when you got to Hollywood, and that you started to learn how to sell without looking desperate.
Yeah.
And I think anybody that's been in and around sales or business would probably agree. I mean, when people get into sales mode or try to sell something, it is blatantly apparent within the first 5 seconds whether they're confident or they're desperate or they have to have this sale. And it is either an immediate turnoff if they're desperate and, have no confidence in what they're doing, or it's just like a magnet, right? You're like, wait, this guy or gal must have something.
Yeah. I mean,
so how does the whack method and 3-minute rule, how does that play into that dynamic?
So I get asked a lot from my training stuff. Can I teach can you teach my sales force to be more confident? And of course I say, like, no, you cannot teach people to be confident. You can teach them to act confident, but we sniff that out now. Like, you pretending that you're confident about something is not going to fly. And it's because if you look at what actually confidence is not mannerisms. It's not the color of your tie. It's none of that stuff. It's not the belief in yourself, none of that crap. Confidence is the belief that you have in the value you are bringing to others. Okay? If you really genuinely believe in the value that you're bringing to somebody else, you will be exceptionally confident about that. And we did this amazing experiment in New York where, we had a guy on the street trying to hand out, tickets to a bus thing. Nobody would. We had him trying to hand out gold bars, quarter ounce gold bars, right? Worth $400 or $500 each. They're just gold. Here you go. Here you go. Here you go. Guess what? Nobody wants those either because nobody believes it. They're just like, whoa. But the difference in his attitude, he's out there basically cold calling. He had a ticket to nothing and he's just like, or he has $500 worth of gold. It's like the way he was talking. It's all about the belief in the value you have to others, right? It changes everything. And I use this on stage. If I was pitching you to be the caterer at your wedding and I was coming to see your bride to pitch you the idea, and the chef that I had that was going to be there on site was Gordon Ramsay, it's like, how many words would I use for that, right? Like, I have Gordon Ramsay. Like, would you hear me pitching his Michelin stars and his history and trying to show you an example? No. Right. I have Gordon Ramsay. You would sense it, you would feel it, and the number of words you use is inversely proportionate to the confidence you actually convey. So if it was my brother-in-law who's an ex-convict, just got out of prison, doesn't really cook, but is really mean and is demanding that I get him a job, and I'm trying to sell that to you and your bride, like, how many words am I going to try to use that way, right? I'm going to be like, the chef doesn't really matter. I think it's more about the prepper. And you're just going to know the more words I use, the slower my appearance of confidence goes down. And you can have your chest out, big smile, and you keep talking, you are out the door. Like, and that is just a fact. So when I talk about saying less and getting more, it's like the less you say, the more confident you appear, the more value you convey. And that is just a reality of the world. Now, I'll tell you a funny, I don't tell this story often, but a friend of mine, mildly interesting celebrity guy, as an investor who's invested in a couple of his independent films, and this guy from South Korea, and he says, hey, you should meet my buddy. He's like a billionaire, and we're going to do this new thing. This is in like May 2020. He's like, he's got this cool thing and it's masks. He's going to make masks. So I get him on the phone and they want me to get involved in the company and invest and all this stuff. And it says, in Korea, we've been using masks as part of our culture. This COVID thing is going to make everybody in America wear masks and stuff. We're going to make 1 million of them. We have these amazing nanotech super KN95s, and my family's connected to this manufacturing. I'm going to put 4 of these manufacturing machines on a boat, take them to Los Angeles. We're going to make them here, make 1 million masks. You should come on board. We could really use you. Oh, okay. How much money are you raising? He's like, I don't know. Like maybe 6 million, maybe 7. I don't know. Something like somewhere between 5 and 7, I think. Oh, okay. What are you offering? What is the term for investors? Oh, that's a good question. I'll probably just some convertible note or something like that along those lines, I think. I got to figure that part out. Oh, okay. Well, can you send me the deck? Like just walk through. It's like, oh man, I haven't had time to put a deck together. Let's just been, busy and stuff, but yeah. Okay. Do you have the masks? Like, can I see one? He's like, well, yeah, but they're in Korean. So then you're not going to really see whether, like I can send you one, I guess, but like, no, I don't really have that either. When are you going to do this? I got to get the boat still. We'll figure that out. But you should come on board. Help us out. Like invest something. Invest $250,000, something just to get started, and we can, we'll go from there. I'm telling you, man, I could barely run and get my checkbook fast enough, right? Like if it wasn't for my wife, like knowing that she'd kill me if I did that, like I wanted to give the guy the money. And the reason is, I get literally hundreds of pitches. The only person that would ever talk to me like that, the only person that would get me on the phone, I'm not that easy to get, you know what I mean? That would go through all this, get me in a meeting, get me on the phone and pitch like that with that little information is a billionaire who doesn't give a rat's ass whether I give him money or not. He couldn't care less. And I knew that instinctively. I'd never met him before. And I just knew it. I knew he didn't need my money, and I knew that he was going to whatever, and I just wanted to be part of that, right? It's an extreme example. Now, they did sell 1 million masks, so I probably should have given them the money. But it's an extreme example, and I don't suggest you use that tactic. I'm just using it to illustrate that you can see, like, the guy who doesn't need you or pitch you or try to convince you is probably the guy that you want to be attached to, who has value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the key in confidence is if you focus on what value you're actually bringing. And listen, if you are selling something that's an inferior product at an overpriced market that doesn't work very well, like, well, you got lots of problems. I can't help you with that. It's not my game. 99.9 of the things I see are like diamonds in the rough that if people just understood the value, they would want it. And I was like, that I can help you with, because that creates confidence where you're not pitching past the sell. You're not over talking. You're just basically laying it out. And that's, if you ask me what I do not pitch you what I do. It's because I'm not really taking on new clients. And like, I got nothing to sell. I got nothing to sell. So it's like, I don't need you to buy my book. I don't have a course to sell. I'm not taking new consulting clients really right now. So if you ask me my gig, I'm just sort of like, yeah, I help companies tell their messages. I'll say something so innocuous. And they're like, you wrote a book? Yeah, I wrote a book. Like, yeah, whatever. Like, and ironically, now I can't get people to stop sending me stuff because it's like, they know that the guy who's not pitching them is the guy you want, the bank that, the banks want to give people the money who don't need money.
Right.
And you want to hire the guy, you want to hire the consultant or the coach who doesn't need you to be their client. Yeah. And that's where confidence really comes from.
It's interesting. Yeah. It reminds me of, people always say that men can all, like in a dating game, right? Men are always sort of make fools of themselves being desperate, but as soon as they have a significant other, then that's when all of a sudden they are all of a sudden attractive to the opposite sex. But I think it happens, in lots of aspects. So have you found that, you mentioned that confidence is a true belief in the value that you're offering to others. Have you found that you also, it's sort of like a two-part confidence, that you have to be confident, or you have to understand that you're going to deliver value, but then you also need to be confident in your message about the value?
Well, it's sort of like that comes first, right? You have to be confident in the way you can convey that value, right? Because what happens to most people is they can't get the value of what they're offering to the other person. Like, your only job is to take your idea and translate it into their understanding. That's it. And when that gets bogged down in your pitch presentation, the style, people ask questions out of order. Like, most people listening will have had that where they're trying to make a pitch or presentation in some way and people start asking questions. You're like, oh, wait, I'm going to get to that in a minute, right? That's because your audience's brain is already ticking way ahead of you because everything's out of order, right? So, and this is what happened with my very first oil and gas guy. Was like, he was so insular and I did a lot in biotech and life sciences. And it's like all these nerdy scientists, for lack of a better term, and they're just like, they come across sheepish, and it's not because they don't have value, it's because they don't know how to get you to understand their value. Right. And everything that is telling them that it's not working. And so people ask me like, oh, can you work with me? I'm an introvert, right? And I'm like, introverts are the only ones I work really well with. If I get somebody else like me, it is not as good. Because I don't want to do the work. I want to leverage my personality and my charm, as small as it is, to get me through, right? Like, I don't want to do the work and do all this, take all the steps. I just want to be like, come on, we're friends. Give me the deal, right? Yep. And the introverted scientist, they're the opposite. They don't want to make friends and make nice and use their personality. They just want you to understand their seismograph and how the flux capacitor works. Like, that's what they want. And like, when I show them how to do that, and I can get anybody to understand what you're talking about, all of a sudden they're getting the response. And that's how their confidence grows, because now they know the value is getting through. Gotcha. And it's just like, oh, it's amazing, Yeah. And I'm sure it's very fulfilling to be able to help others. It's in that way. If you're giving away gold bars to people, but it's locked in a safe, you'd be so excited for like when you're there, like, oh, I can give this to someone. All they got to do is unlock the safe. And it's like, oh, but you don't know the combination. And so I talk to people and they're like, oh, it sounds kind of interesting. Can I get no, I don't have the combination. After a while, you're just like, there's gold in here. I just don't know how to get it out. Yeah. And so I a little bit of that storytelling is like, I can show you how to give people the combination. So they open it up and they're like, holy gold bar. And you're like,
Wow.
yes, a gold bar.
Yeah.
And then you go.
Beautiful.
Right?
Beautiful. Have you found that it's a heavy lift getting people to that point, or maybe a better question is how long does it take to sort of get them there?
No, I mean, for most people, it's one, like I'll do, there's lots of times where I'll do a 2 and 3 day workshop session with major companies. And it's like 4 hours in, we're like, woo, we kind of got it. Like, all right, let's do more. And I've had the reverse where, I had a company in Saudi Arabia that, huge, massive company with all these divisions. And I was just trying to get through my first exercise, which is, Lamar Holdings is a blank that does blank. And sounds easy. Not really. Like, if I asked you about your podcast that's blank for blank, you'd be just like, well, but
right.
You want more words.
I don't think it sounds easy at all. Yeah, I believe you.
No. And so there was 13 heads of the company at this workshop, and it took us 4 hours to come up with those 2 words, those 2 phrases, right? Because none of them had ever asked each other. They were all in different divisions, and they're like, we're an infrastructure company. No, we're not. We're a holding company. Like, on and on, right?
Yep.
So usually if it's depth, it's a good day to go through everything, because I got to get people on board of the idea, and then we got to play with the language.
Right.
And when you reorder it right, you're like, oh my God, this makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, I get it all the time. People will read the book and they will send me their new pitch, and I'm just like, holy crap, it's 1 page. And it's like, I know, it's so much better. And I love that.
Yeah. What a difference you're making. So have you stumbled across anything or anyone that where you haven't been able to make it sort of fit in the model?
Yeah. Again, it's like, I make the joke all the time, like, I can't polish your turd, right? Like, if you got a pile of crap, I can't make it shinier. Maybe gotcha. I just don't do that. This is not what I do. And I work with a major hotel organization and in Las Vegas, and they wanted me to come and work on their golf course stuff, because golf courses were, going downhill very fast, because most of the new generation doesn't have 4 hours to give up all the time. It's frustrating. So they were talking, making the holes bigger, moving it into 6-hole segments. Like, they're desperate.
Wow.
But they also had a huge timeshare company that they wanted me to work with. And timeshares are built on convincing you in the moment of emotion to sign up for something, trying to sort of hide the fine print. And then, and I'm not kidding, I'm not using this as a metaphor. You can tell I'm not prone to exaggeration. But they would literally take the signed contract of your timeshare and they would walk it physically to the customer retention department. And that's where it sits, because they know in the first 7 days, 90% of the people are going to call to cancel. And then once it passes that, if they can keep you or you don't call, then they move it into customer. So, my issue was like, we can't sell like this anymore, guys. Like, you are selling to the lowest common denominator, and the idea of people who buy out of emotion, and it's usually older people, that kind of thing. And I was like, there aren't enough of those people left. We have to restructure. And it just didn't work. They just weren't ready to do that. They just weren't ready, because it's just like, what are you talking about? Like, that's the secret. Like, if people knew that how the timeshare, the fees and stuff were going to work, like, they wouldn't buy it. I'm like,
yeah,
isn't that
get a new product to
sell? Like,
yeah.
And the irony is, like, timeshares work incredibly well for a certain type of person.
Right.
It's looking for a certain thing. And it's like, can't we go in that direction? But the marketing and the process is like, they're years away from that.
Gotcha. Well, it's interesting you say that. That was going to be my next question is, do you find, are there people that you work with that that you can help, but they're just not open to it or ready or willing?
It's not as much that as it's more like they don't do what I told them to do. Like, that I have happen where it's like, why didn't you just do it the way I told you to do it? Like, this is what I do. Like, you know what I mean? That happens. And it's just also like, sometimes the large organizations, they do this process as like box checking for development. right? And it's just like, I did a huge thing with Airbnb, and it's like, I don't think I changed their business at all in one bit. And for me, it's kind of like, when I first wrote the book and I was getting big clients, I was logo chasing, right? You go to my website, there's lots of cool logos. Like I chased logos, and I wanted fancy CEOs to coach, and like, okay, but after a few times, you're like, wait, so, like, and this thing with Bank of America, which was amazing, but you're just like, do they do it different now? Like, I don't know. For me, it felt a lot like TV, which is like, I put all my creativity into this, and I really don't know what the result is. Whereas I have a startup that after I had said I'm not taking new clients, I ended up meeting the guy. They ended up asking me, blah, blah, blah. And it's an AI-based company that helps advanced cancer patients find alternative treatments that their oncologists could never find because of the power of AI searching through the database. Well, I came on, we restructured their pitch, we raised money, the database went live. A wealthy donor called like maybe a year later and just said, hey, I don't know who you guys are, but I want you to know that I was in Los Angeles. I've been diagnosed with cancer, and I've been flying around, very, very wealthy, flying around trying to find any doctor to do anything experimental. None of them would do it. And this one guy said, oh, I met this TV producer who was working with this company called X Cures, and I've had a couple of patients that have been amazing results. You should check that out. And so this guy called to say, hey, just so you know, X Cures found me a drug from 1997 that had failed trial. I'm cancer free. Wow. And if it wasn't for that TV producer, I'd be dead today. And I'm like, holy shit, that's me.
Wow. Wow.
And the guy
said, pretty cool.
He said, hey, I want to help the company. Like, we're a relatively influential family. Like, what do you need? And the CEO was like, well, we're just getting ready to go do our series, another series of raising money. And he's like, well, how much are you raising? He's like, we're going to do like $9 million. And he goes, okay, I'll take it all.
Wow.
Wrote a check.
Wow.
For $9 million. He's the lead shareholder in the entire company today because the service saved his life.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so it's like that, or a group of branch managers from, Bank of America touring around California. It's like, I get it. It's fun. It's great. But there's real difference. Like, I can actually make a difference, And so
absolutely.
I kind of love that space.
Well, that's inspiring. That's really, really cool. That is really cool. Well, so look, I know, you're not taking any more clients, but for individuals that are listening, that find what you're saying as fascinating and interesting and valuable as I do, if they want to learn more or practice, other than obviously, buying your book, is there a place they can go or thoughts or suggestions you have for them?
I mean, listen, you can go to my website and join in my email thing. I don't do much anymore. Everything I do is basically free. So I'll have every quarter I do a big webinar thing where I just do that. I mean, that's the telltale sign. And it's been a real help for me over the last few years because social media sort of exposed that, right? We've all been on social media with you watching people online telling you how to make money, right? Use my system to make money. Use my system to get real estate. It's like, if you're really making money on this, would you be on here selling your system? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Exactly.
And that's the truth. And so when people are like, wait, you don't sell anything? It's like, I don't sell anything. Like, I will do a course one day. I just haven't put it together yet. And I'm in that mode, which I love that mode. I spent 20 years trying to convince people to do stuff for me in television and please buy my stuff. And like, I don't really want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I even did it with the book. Like, please buy my book. Please read my book. Can I get a quote from my book? Can I get on your show? Like, I remember having to ask Whoopi Goldberg, who's a friend of mine, to get on The View. And I put her in a position to say no, because she's like, we're only doing political stuff anymore. Like, no, you can't be on The View. And I just remember thinking like, that's it. I'm never doing this again. And so the publisher's like, are you writing another book? I'm like, no, I don't want to do it anymore. I like where I am at in life. I've had a couple of good breaks, so things are going well. And like, if you need help with stuff, send me an email. I am happy to help people. All you got to do is tell me how pretty I am. I'm, happy to do fun stuff for you. That's sort of where my world is now. And yeah, there's lots of stuff on my website, and if anybody has something spectacular, I'm happy to help.
Awesome. That's great. Well, we will, I won't flash your email across the screen.
Yeah.
But we'll put your website.
I'm easy to get. I'm at brantpinvidic.com. You can see all the goodies there. So
perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, I've got one final question, Brant. I ask this to every guest that comes on the show. If, God forbid, I don't want this ever to happen, but if there was a natural disaster or fire, and you, everyone was okay, everybody's safe, but you're outside, and you had 10 seconds to run back in to grab one thing and run back out before the building collapse, what is it that you grab?
I mean, this is such an interesting question. I mean, other than my laptop, which is the only thing I really need, and I had this happen to me in LA when we had a fire. We evacuated, and like our entire lives fit into the back of one car. I would say,
wow.
Other than the cash in my safe,
yeah,
I'd have that go up in flames. But I don't have anything anymore. As you get older, you get to the point where you're like, I got nothing.
Well,
you know what I mean, I want my computer, but all this crap, I'm leaving in June. I'm going for a year to tour the world with my 2 youngest kids and my wife. We're going to 52 countries in 52 weeks.
Wow.
And so I'm getting rid of most of my crap anyways.
Wow.
Because I've just realized it. And last year or the year before, I did a tour of the United States, all 48 states in an RV. So, I go from a very large home in Los Angeles to a 650 square foot RV for 6 months. And I loved every second of it. So other than the ability to connect with people like on my laptop and stuff like that, I don't have any real valuable stuff anymore. Like,
that's a great answer.
I don't want my watch going up in flames.
Yeah.
No, but that's actually my cash going up in flames.
That's actually a great answer. I found it usually elicits a pretty interesting, insightful responses, but I think we tend to put way too much value on things, and it seems like you've been able to move past that, and that's impressive.
Like at some point you get all the things, and then you realize that the root of your desire for things is your picture of using them,
right? And
then when you don't use them, you're like, that's odd.
Yeah.
Like I built a horseshoe pit and a bocce ball thing in my yard.
Right.
Well, do you know how many people come to my house to play horseshoes and bocce ball?
Right.
Not very many.
Right. The fun
every
part
day
was,
I walk out there, I have horses on the property, so I go out and see my horses, and I walk by my bocce ball and my horseshoe pit, and it pisses me off.
Yeah.
And some days I'll throw horseshoes by myself because I wanted to get used. So I've noticed that, and like, how many things do I actually use? I have a friend who's building a massive renovation in his house, like massive renovation. So they moved out. They moved into this place, and before they could unpack, they had a problem with the house that they were renting. So they had to move to another house that they were renting. So they moved all the again. It's been 9 months, and these are very wealthy people with a ton of stuff. It's been 9 months, and they still haven't unpacked the boxes yet.
Wow.
And he's like, I have all these boxes of all these things, and I haven't even opened them yet. Like, I got my computer and some clothes, and that's it.
Wow, that speaks volume. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you don't need those things if you're not opening the boxes, right?
You need them if you use them.
Yep.
That's it. You want everything in life that you look at that you desire, it's because you are picturing activity, right? And I do this whole thing on stage about desire and activity, right? You look at the house and you're like, I love that house. It's because you picture having people over, you picture, in the backyard with this amazing pool, you picture yourself swimming, you picture yourself sitting there reading a book. You picture the activity, and that's what creates desire. If you see a hamburger, you picture eating it. That's why you want it, right? And then what happens is people get these things and then they don't use them. They don't do the activity that made them want it in the first place. And so the exercise is to figure out not just what you need, but what you'll actually use. Because I got lots of friends that have a ton of toys and they use them. That's great,
Right. Interesting. I bet there could be a whole podcast just on that alone.
Listen, anytime.
Well, Brant, listen, it is an honor to have you on. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I know our audience is going to eat this up. So much, much, much appreciated, and wish you all the best. Thank you, Brant. Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.